Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome on this brisk Friday morning. We're so glad to see you here. My name is Greg Bowman, and I serve as the Dean of the Roger Williams University School of Law. And I'm not going to give the introduction to the symposium, but I do want to welcome you here. This is a really exciting time. This is the first time we've had an in-person law review symposium since the pandemic. That's very, very exciting, and I want to give a big shout out to our editor-in-chief Delaney and the entire board for putting together a wonderful program. This is a perfect example of how law students can make a difference in the world and make their law schools better. All the credit goes to them, and I'm just so proud to be at this law school with them and to be one of their future colleagues. So I'm going to start us off with our law school's land and labor acknowledgement, which we read before every major event and reflects the values that we hold at this law school. So as we begin our program today, I want to take this moment to reflect on the lands. We are coming from many places, and we want to acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of indigenous and native peoples who have been here since time immemorial, and to recognize that we must continue to build our solidarity and kinship with Native peoples across the Americas and across the globe. Roger Williams University School of Law is located in Bristol, Rhode Island. And so we acknowledge and we honor the Narragansett and Pokanoket people, as well as Somes, the original name of the land on which our campus resides. We also acknowledge that this country would not exist if not for the free enslaved labor of Black people. And we recognize that the town of Bristol and the very land on which our campus resides have benefited significantly from the trade of enslaved people from Africa. The economy of New England, of Rhode Island, and more specifically of Bristol, was built from wealth generated through the triangle trade of human lives. During this time of ongoing national reckoning with our history of slavery and the disparate treatment of Black people, we honor the legacy of the African diaspora and the Black lives, knowledge, and skills stolen due to violence and white supremacy. So as we gather here today, the movement for justice and liberation is building in our country, yet many are still being met with violence and even being killed, while other people in our country actively work to stand in the way of progress. As upholders of justice, our hope is to become agents of change for members of our society who have been met with violence, physical, mental, emotional, through our privilege. And as upholders of justice, we believe that our students, who soon will be practitioners of law, can be, and indeed already are, agents of change as well. So thank you very much for being here. It's my pleasure to turn the podium over to Delaney Dibble.
Thank you, Dean Bowman. Good morning and welcome to the annual Roger Williams University Law Review Symposium. My name is Delaney Dibble and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Roger Williams Law Review. This symposium happens every year in conjunction with our Justice for All issue, which focuses on expanding justice to legal services or expanding access to legal services. In that context, this program will focus on the importance of practicing trauma-informed lawyering to build effective attorney-client relationships and provide holistic representation that accounts for the realities of trauma experiences. Our panelists today will discuss various legal topics surrounding trauma-informed practice. Some of those include what is trauma, what is vicarious trauma, how to represent clients who have survived domestic violence, sexual assault, significant mental and physical harm, how to adapt litigation strategies to account for trauma, and ways to prevent vicarious trauma. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all the esteemed panelists and moderators who have taken time out of their busy schedules to speak today, as well as the faculty and staff for their support and effort in putting this wonderful event together today. Lastly, I would like to thank Amy Anthony, our Justice for All editor, and Aidan Boisvert, our Justice for All development editor, for bringing all of these wonderful panelists together and making this event happen today. Before we begin, I would like to give a warning. Today, all of our panels will cover difficult topics. Particularly panels 2 and 3 will cover topics that may be sensitive and difficult to discuss for some. Prior to the start of these panels, we will remind attendees that they may cover sensitive material. If at any point you feel you need to step out because you cannot listen to the discussion or the discussion is hard for you to listen to in any way, please feel free to do so. Thank you all for coming today to support the Law Review and learn about such a crucial topic in the legal profession. Without further ado, please welcome our first panel discussing what constitutes trauma and the importance of trauma-informed lawyering. I will now turn it over to our moderators of the first panel, Nicole Dyszlewski, Professor and Assistant Dean of Curricular Innovation at Roger Williams University School of Law, and Sam Filiaggi, JD candidate at Roger Williams University School of Law. Thank you all. Sam and Nicole, if you could just make sure your mics are on. Thank you.
Hello? There we
go.
Hello?
Panelists, I will say your mics are hot at all times.
Thank you for the reminder.
If you would like to start this panel off with some real controversy, I'm here for it.
But good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us, and especially thank you to our panelists today. This is the first time that we're discussing trauma and trauma-informed lawyering. But before we get into what those topics actually mean, if you could all please take some time to introduce yourselves and your experiences in this area, I would really appreciate it. So perhaps starting with Sarah and moving down, please.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Sarah Katz. I'm a clinical law professor at Temple Law School. I also currently hold the title of Senior Fellow at the Stoneleigh Foundation, which is based in Pennsylvania, where I reside. Trauma-informed practice has been basically a life's passion for my career and something that I've been working on for at least 20 years at this point. It's something that Professor Haldar and I have had the opportunity to collaborate on. We've written together, we've trained attorneys together, but it deeply influences my approach to directing and teaching the law clinic that I run at Temple Law School, as well as my approach to lawyering. And so I look forward to sharing more.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. My name is Deeya Haldar. I teach the Civil Justice Clinic at Villanova's Law School, and I direct the clinical program there. The Civil Justice Clinic is a clinic that focuses on domestic violence survivors as clients, primarily in family law, but also in other civil cases. In that area of work and the work that I did before coming to Villanova, which was entirely family law, it's a very high trauma affected client population. So that's how I started thinking about trauma-informed lawyering, because I was really interested in how to set students up for success in that field. And that's how Professor Katz and I approached our article. So I'm looking forward to our panel today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sheehan. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a staff attorney at Safe Passage Project in New York City, where I represent young people who are in removal proceedings. I graduated from the law school in 2020 and shortly after completed a master's in education and trauma-informed education, just given the young people I work with and trying to be the best advocate I could be for them. Recently, I've become an adjunct professor at New York Law School, where I teach the Immigration Law and Litigation Clinic. And bringing a trauma-informed approach is not only important to the clients I represent, but how I teach students to work with young people who have experienced high levels of trauma. Thank you.
I can't believe you're making me go last after all of these amazing people. So hi, my name is Chelsea Donaldson. I am the supervising attorney for the Veteran Benefits and Military Unit at the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. CVLC still is, but there are more now, is the first medical legal partnership with the Veterans Healthcare Administration. And as the name indicates, we
represent vets. I spent the first 2 years of my time at CVLC representing military sexual trauma survivors. In addition to that, I'm a licensed master social worker through the state of Connecticut. I graduated with my MSW with a specialization in advanced generalist practice, but in my former life as a therapist, I spent some time in the federal probationary system and also being a school counselor for sixth grade girls, which is the hardest job that I've ever had. And, you know, I see and interact with trauma every single day. Veterans are a very multifaceted population who are very high risk for a lot of stuff, which we're going to talk about today. And I'll leave it at that. I'll save the controversy for the rest.
Last but certainly not least.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you kind of undersold yourself. That sounded like
I feel like defending children in removal proceedings following that is kind of tough.
So we thought, because we all have different backgrounds here, that it would be helpful to start the day with sort of a definition. So the American Psychological Association defines trauma as an emotional response to a terrible event. Psychological experts further define trauma in different ways. Dr. Marty Horowitz, a renowned expert in this field, defines trauma as a sudden and forceful event that overwhelms a person's ability to respond to it, and adds that trauma can occur without someone experiencing physical harm. The key component to a traumatic event is overwhelming one's ability to cope. So to get us all on the same page, I'll start with Chelsea this time. Can you share, like, what is your definition of trauma, or if you like these definitions of trauma, what might you add to it?
I think about trauma in two different ways. I think about the event and I think about the reaction. In the work that I do, when I talk to the veterans who want benefits for the traumatic experiences that they have gone through, I ask two questions. What happened and how did it make you feel? So I think when we discuss trauma, we talk about the horrible things that happen, but I think we need to talk more about the reaction to that trauma and how it can manifest itself in decisions that people make. I represent a lot of folks who, from the outside looking in, made some pretty dumb decisions. And unless you know the full story of both what happened and how it made them feel, you might think that these folks just messed up and that's why they got kicked out with a less than honorable discharge. But the reality is they have been through some serious crap and they don't have access to mental health treatment. There's a huge stigma about it, and how that trauma manifests and how it causes this chaos that can wrap itself up in everything around the person, I think needs to be talked about more.
I love that you said that, just to that you ask not only what happened, but how did you feel about it. I feel sometimes in legal ed and in law generally that, like, we're not warm and fuzzy, right? Like, asking about, like, I was a real estate lawyer. I never asked about anybody's feelings about what, like, I'm selling you a house, no worries. So I really appreciate that, because I think it gets to the core of things. Like, we very quickly, before 10 a.m., got right to it. So thank you so much. Will?
Great. Yeah, I think, of course, the APA gets it right. And I really appreciate Chelsea's description of thinking of trauma in those two ways. First is the event or series of events, and second, the emotional and physical response that the body holds on to. And as practitioners who interact with people who have gone through traumatic events or series of events, this is where we can interrupt and adjust our practice to best support the person we're working with within the confines of our professional responsibility as attorneys. So that second part, the emotional and physical response, is something that I'm constantly checking in on and adjusting how I interact with the young people I work with to best support them. I can't change or want to change any of the horrible things they went through in their country of origin or their pathway to the United States or being in the inherently traumatic immigration system, but I can respond to that response that I know that they're holding on to.
So I somewhat want to echo what's been said and agree with it. And I think for me, what I really try to remember is that trauma is really very individualized. I think it's defined, or one definition that I've seen a lot is that the event is too much for a person's internal and external resources that they cannot cope, right? So that really kind of puts an emphasis on what each individual has available to them. So something that might be trauma for one person might not be for another person. And I think it also really kind of draws attention to the fact that many of our client populations don't have a lot in terms of resources when the trauma happens. So they had more adequate resources at that time, external resources, then maybe what the effect of the trauma is at this point would be different, right? And so that's, I think, something that's really important to me to think about in terms of the trauma definition.
I think when I think about the definition of trauma, first want to go back to, trauma comes from the Greek word for wound. That's trauma is that word, right? So we're really talking about a wound or wounds that people walk through the world with. I really like healer, author, and trauma specialist Resmaa Menacem's definition of trauma. He says trauma is what happens in the body when we experience too much, too fast, and too soon, in such a way that our normal ability to cope is overwhelmed, leaving us powerless, out of control, or disconnected from our own community and beliefs. And I think that what's really important when we talk about trauma to me is that we think about it really broadly. The reality is, I think one of the biggest mistakes attorneys make is focusing in on the trauma we think we know about, right? We are helping a particular client and they are, a youth in removal proceedings, or they are a vet who, is trying to regain benefits, or they are a parent or caregiver that's enmeshed in the child welfare system, or what I would call the family policing system, which is where my work focuses. But I think we have to really understand that people don't exist in a silo or a vacuum, and they come with the full body of their experience. And so that includes not just their individual experiences, but the ways in which trauma has affected them communally, intergenerationally, historically, and also systemically. And a thing that I don't think we talk about enough is how much harm the systems we function in cause trauma. So even as we advocate within these systems and are trying to accomplish the best outcomes for our clients, we also are participating in and are complicit with the experience of trauma that many of our clients are having. And I can say more about that as we go on, but that's my perspective.
It's interesting you said that. Before we started, Sam was retelling a story about how there was a speaker who came to speak to law students who was formerly incarcerated and reported that just the experience of being in this fake courtroom was traumatizing. And so thinking about not just sort of what came before the legal proceedings, but what is happening now is traumatizing. And so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Right, and thank you all for what you've added as well, because trauma is obviously so complicated. It's an event, it's emotions, it's behaviors that result from that event and those emotions. It's systemic. And professors have often joked too that when clients walk through the door, they're not going to walk in with a sign that says what their legal issue that they need help with is. As lawyers, we need to be prepared to take our clients like whole beings as they come in, and it's our responsibility to care for all of that. So my next question to that point is to Deeya and Sarah, because unlike Chelsea and Will, most lawyers have no formal training in trauma, and those are obviously experiences that come through the door with every, potentially with every client that we have. So what are some common signs of trauma that legal professionals could be aware of or pick up on when working with survivors or with clients in general? And how can recognizing these signs improve our job as lawyers?
So we don't have any particular training in that either, just like most attorneys. But so the important thing to keep in mind is when thinking about trauma as it might present in clients is it really can present in a whole variety of ways. Clients who are trauma affected may be extremely emotional. They may cry a lot. They may be inappropriately emotional, or they may have very limited affect. They may be very kind of emotionally blank and not crying when they're talking about something terrible that happened to them and not really express emotion. They might be very suspicious of you because you're part of the legal system, which you are part of the legal system. They may not want to talk to you very much. They may not want to reveal things that you think are, or they may kind of be overly sharing with you about things that that are not what you're there to represent them for. One important thing to remember is that clients who are trauma affected may not be able to tell you what happened during their trauma incident, right? So in domestic violence cases, this is very common that clients can't really say what the incident of violence was exactly. They don't seem to be able to have that kind of recall. I know we're going to talk about how the neurobiology of trauma soon, so I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's really important to know in terms of how you can expect your client to interact with you in terms of preparing for a hearing. That your client just may not remember some things, and that's an effect of the trauma. Overall, one perspective to have is that trauma has an effect on clients as they participate in the attorney-client relationship, and that's the effect of the trauma. It's not necessarily how they are intentionally planning to interact with you, and for the most part, it's not because of what you are doing. That is how they are interacting with you. But I know we'll talk a little bit later about kind of how for attorneys to approach that relationship, to approach the attorney-client relationship.
Just to add to that, I mean, I think one important thing to remember about trauma is that our trauma responses are both how our body and brains cope with the experience in the moment, but also how we continue to cope with that existing wound without opportunities to heal. And so without opportunities to heal, our responses to trauma can become embedded, and they end up just looking like personality, right? How the person shows up in the world. I think some of the ways that may look is we talk about in relation to trauma in the moment, but also again, later on, that can look like a, fight or flight or freezing or fawning or annihilating, right? Or some combination of constriction, pain, fear, dread, anxiety, unpleasant thoughts, reactive behaviors, or other sensations or experiences. That's again Resmaa Menakem. But I know I'm spending a lot of time on him, but I think he just gets this so succinctly. One of the things that Menakem says frequently is that trauma decontextualized in a person just looks like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family just looks like family traits. And trauma in a people looks like a culture. Right? And so unless we take the time to ask the questions and understand what are the wounds that are underlying, we aren't really going to get it, right? We aren't really going to understand the perspective of the person that we are purporting to help, and we really risk reenacting that harm by not being aware of it.
Can I just follow up with Deeya and Sarah, starting with Sarah? Can you explain the neurobiology of trauma and how it informs a person's reaction and behaviors? So this isn't a choice. We're not choosing to act in a certain way. There's this neurobiology behind it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we coordinated a little, and I'm gonna pass to Professor Haldar.
Yeah, so Professor Katz started talking a little bit about this, about the evolutionary response, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. So when an incident of trauma is happening, there is often a stress hormone released, cortisol, and partly because of that and because of the trauma, a person's memories are not being stored in the same way that they usually are for a non-traumatic incident. And they're stored in the amygdala, which is where very strong emotions are stored. And so when that person has to recall that incident, the amygdala is triggered, and they often feel those same strong emotions that they did at that time, even though the incident is not happening. That part of their brain doesn't necessarily understand the difference or differentiate between the actual trauma and being reminded of the trauma. So that's why we talk about trauma triggers, which trigger being in that experience again. I also just wanted to add one thing and just again briefly mention that the way that trauma is processed in the brain and the way the memories are stored are what makes it very difficult for trauma survivors to talk in detail about what has happened. Sometimes that their memories are just not accessible to them, and sometimes trigger very strong emotions, but also just are not accessible to them. So often the trauma-affected clients just can't tell you what happened, and it's not because they are intentionally doing that. They just do not have access to the memories to those memories in their brain.
Deeya and Sarah, thank you so much for laying out, I think, like, so succinctly, like, what some of, like, these clients are going through, and, like, what is happening, like, in their brains as a result of these events. And the other half of the attorney-client relationship is the attorney as well. So lawyers may experience trauma in addition to their clients, through their clients. The Office for Victims of Crime within the Department of Justice defines vicarious trauma as a reaction to trauma exposure with a range of psychological symptoms that can occur from a variety of experiences, routine or normal in legal work, like listening to individual clients recount their experiences, looking at evidence or casework, and responding to the aftermath of violence. So I'm going to turn to Will and Chelsea, and you can be as general or personal as you like here, but how can lawyers maybe recognize when they've experienced vicarious trauma and care for their mental health? Perhaps starting with Will.
Great. So I think preparing for vicarious trauma is an intentional practice, and it should be done through intentional planning that you reflect on at least quarterly and improve upon. I think in American capitalistic society, we often think of self-care as a bubble bath or a shopping spree, but it really is so much deeper than that, and understanding how we can unpack our professional lives to then show up the next day and be the best advocates we can be it's a hard formula to figure out. It's a formula that's changing throughout different life stages that we're in. So I think that lawyers can recognize their vicarious trauma by knowing that it will present itself. So you need to be intentional and have a plan that works for you. For me personally, playing cello is very important to my out of work life. And I play in a group and I take lessons every week. And I know that that's time away from work where I'm flexing a different part of my brain and engaging in something that will fulfill me. I think where I got it wrong a little bit before was I'm a big reader and I love to read, and I was constantly reading books about work. So I was not turning off that part of my brain, and I was delving deeper into topics that I needed a little bit of a break from. So beyond your intentional wellness plan, I think having an accountability partner at work is also really key to managing vicarious trauma. Someone who understands what you're going through every day, and you guys can check in with each other to see how you're doing and how you can adjust to make sure that you're still showing up every day, energized and ready to work with the clients you work with?
Thank you so much for saying the bubble bath thing, because I hate the term self-care. I think it is just this, it means nothing. It is often kind of spouted by folks with a profound amount of privilege, who haven't really engaged with the hard work of untangling their own trauma or the trauma that they inflict on other people. So I hate the term self-care. With that little vent aside, I think going from law school slash therapying into the practice of law, I was really struck by how law school does not teach you that you grow to care about your clients. And I think the hardest thing for me was I was entering a nonprofit, and I was working with people that I didn't really have a lot of experience with. I don't come from a military family. I kind of fell into this work, to be totally honest with you. And all I knew was that I wanted to help folks who are struggling with their mental health. And boy, did I find the population that did that. And I just wanted to help. I did not realize how much I would grow to care about these people who signed up for the military industrial complex to get free school, to get health care, to get out of their poor neighborhoods, to get access to a lot of the stuff that a lot of the folks in this room can take for granted, I'm sure. And then they got screwed. They got hurt. They were traumatized by the institution that was supposed to take care of them. They got kicked out. They came back, and they don't have access to anything that they were promised. And these cases can take years. And I had this situation a couple of years ago before I became a supervisor, with a client who is still my client. And I had poured my entire heart and soul into his appeal. He is a sexual assault survivor. He has been trying for decades to get VA to acknowledge that this happened to him. And I poured my heart and soul into this appeal. And I got a remand, which is like a big win in VA land. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been fighting to get VA to honor this remand. They finally did, like last week. But thank you. You don't have to clap for that. But the first time that they just completely ignored it and re-traumatized my client, I've got very depressed at work. And I, like, the light in how much I loved my job just completely went out. And I felt just so gut punched because I had to call that guy and tell him that VA, once again, is like, you're lying about what happened to you. And for 6 months, I was not productive. I pretty much just showed up, did the bare minimum, and went back out. I made my deadlines, but like at the last minute. And it took my supervisor to kind of pull me aside and be like, you need to take a leave. You need to take a vacation. You need to take 2 weeks where you just don't do any of this. And you need to like go cry or yell or punch something, preferably not a human being, and just like go scream into a pillow and not engage. And I did. And since then, it kind of shook me out of that and made me realize that I was working 80-hour weeks. I have a 35-hour work week officially. I was, not respecting and not upholding my boundaries with my clients. And I was really letting myself take on the entirety of their burden without having any respect for my own. And now, as a supervisor, I recognize it in my staff. I'm a PTO pusher. If I notice you have not taken at least a week of PTO per quarter in my organization, I'm not going to write you up, but I'm going to be like, we're going to pull up the calendar and we're going to schedule something. We have mental health days in my office. I'm like, we have a separate bank of sick days. I'm like, if you wake up and you are like, I cannot engage, unplug. My employees get in trouble if I see that they are on their phone at work while they are on PTO. I think really owning to yourself and your colleagues, the accountability buddies, to when you are away from work, you have to be away. because without that, you are going to inevitably fail your client, either with malpractice or with quitting your job and doing something that is not this crucial work, especially with the incoming presidential administration. We need people doing the work. So PTO pushing. And you can do bubble baths if it really makes you feel better, but like you need to actually unplug and check in with yourself too.
I think what you both said was great because there's a lot of people in the room who aren't doing the amazing work that you're doing, but who can take those lessons back with their own clients in their own area of law and apply them. And so thank you for sharing that. Chelsea, I just want to stick with you. You said you were a social worker um, before being a lawyer. How has your prior experience in working in mental health services shaped your law practice?
I think having an understanding of what post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, all of these different mental illnesses and mental diagnoses that can stem from trauma has been a huge benefit to my clients. Recognizing within another human being that they are reaching an 8 when I really need them to be at a 4 in order to have an actual conversation about their legal options means that my job is much easier and my clients actually trust me at the end of the conversation. I had in my therapy days, I had this guy that I teach the veteran benefits law clinic at UConn Law, and I use this story all the time when my students ask me, how do you deal it when somebody like freaks out? And when I worked in the federal probationary system, I had a gentleman who went through some serious trauma, and now he was in the carceral system. And he had unmedicated schizophrenia. And he came to me and we walked through, what he had to do for his probation. But his hallucination was he would see a rabbit. I'm not joking. Would see a rabbit on my desk, and he would have conversations with this hallucination instead of me. And that to me was such a lesson in not everybody communicates the same way. And just because somebody communicates in a way that seems totally alien to you does not mean that they're not communicating with you. And I use that in my daily practice with vets who, can't remember the traumatic experiences that they've gone through. It doesn't mean they're lying. It means they literally cannot remember because their brain will not let them. I use it with my folks who hallucinate or are in psychotic episodes because of the trauma that they have experienced. These people aren't crazy. They're trying to communicate with you in the best way that they know how. And so I think my experiences in those in that career really has helped me shape my communication process and puzzle with each person that I speak with.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic example of like how like trauma like informed practicing can intervene and like improve the outcome and experience like for these clients, which is like why we do what we do. And in that vein too, I'm very excited to have Deeya and Sarah here because you both co-authored the Pedagogy of Trauma Informed Lawyering, and that's, if I can say, an influential and highly cited paper. And you in it you assert that teaching trauma-informed practice in law school clinics is critical to preparing law students for their legal careers. So, in a nutshell, I would love for you to both talk about why trauma-informed practice is relevant to all legal fields, not just fields that see like a disproportionate amount of traumatized clients, and what should law schools teach students to prepare them to practice this way.
So, I mean, it's been nearly 10 years since we published that article, and I think one of the things that I just want to put out there is that not only has science developed, like our understanding of trauma and its impact on the body, the brain continues to evolve, but also like my own understanding and sort of thinking about how trauma shows up in practice has evolved, both just from my own experiences as well as ongoing reading. And I think, if we were to write that article today, I actually would probably write it quite differently. And so I thought I'd start by just sharing some of my critiques of our own work, which Deeya knows I'm going to do, but then also kind of my current thinking about what might some of the elements of trauma-informed lawyering be. So some of my self-critiques is that I think when we wrote that article, we were overly focused on individual trauma. Both of us come from backgrounds where we've worked in family law, or for me at that point, most of my work had been as a parent defense attorney, a family defense attorney, and the child welfare system, and I've been running a broader family law clinic, and I don't think that we gave sufficient attention to the layers of historical and intergenerational community trauma that people who interface with the courts often have experienced, and in particular, racialized trauma and systems induced trauma. And I think that when we overemphasize or focus on just the individual trauma, it results in a kind of myopia where we really don't take into account the full humanity of the folks to advocate with and for. I think the second thing is that and this goes back to the discussion of vicarious trauma, is that we kind of frame trauma as if it was something we could kind of catch from our clients, right? This notion that like clients are bringing all this trauma to us and we might experience vicarious trauma as a result. And I think that ultimately that approach really enacts a notion of trauma as pathology, which wasn't the intent, rather than trauma just being as a part of the tapestry of who individuals and communities are. Because of course the wounds don't tell the full story, right? There's joy, there's resilience, there's healing, there are lots of positives that our client populations bring to us. And so I think as attorneys, we should really resist enabling a single narrative, which reduces individuals and communities to their trauma. And I think a piece of that is also taking accountability, as was mentioned, for the ways in which the trauma exposure and our own trauma show up in the way we practice law and interface with our clients. Because, right, like we're taught, at least traditionally, legal education has said, you know, like, oh, the law is not about emotion, but the reality is, like, lawyers are humans, judges are humans, and I think, you know, some of the long view of having been practicing for over 20 years is, you know, I see the impact of trauma on, you know, even like judges that have sat for a really long time in family court, but they're acting in ways that don't reflect the way they used to be in that space. Like, that's trauma impact too. They're hearing these cases day in, day out, colleagues, friends, right, other lawyers where it's showing up. I think my one other critique of where we came in on it is that I think we presented trauma as something that's static without really sufficiently acknowledging that people can and do heal, right? And so people, again, are more than their trauma experiences, but also they can have opportunities to heal. And I think some of my prior thinking was, oh, well, we're lawyers, we're not mental health professionals, we don't have a responsibility for that. But I really think that any notion that lawyers and legal systems don't have accountability and responsibility to promote healing really defies any notion of justice. So with that, I think I'll just mention sort of briefly, because I know I've talked a while, what I think are sort of the four components of trauma-informed, or actually what I think I have now started to call trauma-aware practice, because I'm questioning whether, I think the notion of trauma-informed suggests that it's something we can actually accomplish. We can like learn enough and get to the point where we will not cause any trauma, not, you know, cause any harm. And I don't know that that's totally realistic, the legal systems that we function in. And so I think we can build our awareness of trauma. We can seek to mitigate harm, but I also think we have to be honest with ourselves and with our clients about the ways in which the harms are still happening. And so I think this is what I would say is sort of, and I can expand upon this later, is I think the first component is just that trauma-aware practice is really about radical empathy and love for our clients. It's really about just deepening our understanding of the individuals and communities that we serve. And that just starts by centering the humanity of the people we are working with, right? So very, very simple. I used to say, when I would do trainings on trauma, that there's a lot there, there's so much to study, but a little bit goes a long way. I actually think there's a danger in saying that. Knowing a little bit about trauma, and not a whole lot, right, can ultimately result in just sort of adding to the pathologizing, right? And so we really need to deepen our understanding, to deepen our awareness, and make sure that we are not actually contributing to the harm. I think the second piece of trauma we're allowing, to me, also starts with humility. Another thing that lawyers aren't great at. We have huge egos, right? To believe that, like, we know best, we know the most, right? We sort of cultivate that culture, but some of that reckoning and awareness requires an acknowledgement that the law and legal systems are not neutral, and neither are our role in those systems, right? It's something I often reinforce with my students, right? When the client gets really mad at us or sort of shuts down and doesn't want to talk to us and whatever, and the students in my office saying, I don't get it, I'm trying to help them, why don't they want the help, right? And the reality is, like, we're part of the whole trauma that the person is experiencing, right? And even if our intent is, oh, I want to help, the reality is that may not be how that individual is experiencing that. I think the third component is practicing solidarity, right? And really thinking about our clients, not with a power dynamic of, oh, it's us, the expertise, and them, the ones that they're vulnerable or needing help. Our clients are our most important partners in doing this work, and they have valuable and incredibly important information about what it is that needs to be accomplished and what it needs to change. And so to really get in the weeds and be in solidarity with our clients, as opposed to simply listening to them, means truly putting them in the driver's seat. And then the last piece, I think, is what I would call practicing justice. The reality is that so much of the court process and other dispute resolution processes bear absolutely no relation to what trauma impacted folks truly need. And in fact, even when you sort of get the win, right? You got the benefits, you regain custody of the child, right? There's still harm that is happening and that our clients and communities live with. And I think we need to acknowledge that and be honest both with ourselves as well as the people we are advocating with and for about the ways in which these are harmful experiences, right? That the act of litigating or resolving whatever the conflict is part of the trauma as well. So I will stop.
Deeya, did you want to add?
I just wanted to echo one thing that I think we don't really talk about enough, what Sarah was partly talking about, that we are part of this as attorneys. We're part of this system that is causing this current trauma very often for our clients. And it comes out sometimes, like Sarah was saying, in the client's interaction with us. And I think for a lot of reasons, partly because we or our law students are the ones who are present with the client at that time, right? Sometimes we're, and they can't really take any action about any of the other things that are happening, like this court case that they have going on. In my cases, often there is a former partner who has been physically abusive. There's not a whole lot they can do about that besides what they are doing with us in this court system, that is in itself traumatizing. And then we're often trying to engage them in a process that they don't want to be in, and we're asking them a lot of questions that they don't want to talk about, that may or may not, that we think these topics are relevant. They may not. So And I think really thinking about what our role is and just being part of that system is really, really important and something we should do more.
I thought what was interesting is you sharing that maybe a little bit of knowledge on trauma may be more harmful. And, you know, the tendency to be like, oh, well, I went to an hour-long CLE on this. Like, and someone acts out and you're like, oh, this is your trauma. I figured this out. Instead of it being like an ongoing process for us to educate ourselves, to test out our different strategies and also do it in an individualized way. And also be anticipatory that people aren't showing up with their trauma every day. They aren't telling us about all the things they might not even know, and being like really respectful and being aware of their humanity and being acting with humility instead of expecting we're the expert on this. We may be the expert on law. We may not always be the expert on this person or this trauma. And the other thing I had was a question. Have you considered rewriting it to be the pedagogy of trauma aware lawyering, like 10 years later? I've done research and there doesn't appear to be a lot specifically on racial trauma in the law school space. Can we convince
So we've
you?
talked about it. We have a lot of different projects. I did write a short piece for the symposium issue that'll come out from this conference. That's just more of a short reflective essay, which is some of the notes I've been referencing. But I do think it requires some updating and some thinking. And there has developed a burgeoning area of scholarship in this area, which is really exciting and, you know, sometimes cites to us, but there's a lot more great thinking out there about this. But I think perhaps because of the current project that I'm working on, which is focusing on centering racial justice in our approaches to advocacy within the family policing system, it really has pushed me to really think in broader and more expansive ways around the role of racial trauma and systems-induced trauma.
Thanks.
Thank you. And like talking about like systems and educating ourselves like really brings me back to Will's work as well. Like, so you work with juveniles, as you have said, that are facing removal proceedings, and you earned your Master of Education in Trauma-Informed Education after you realized that you needed to better support your clients. So, Will, I would like to hear how you now incorporate that training into your practice, and like just maybe if you have any experience you'd like to share.
Definitely. I think a trauma-informed training analysis starts at a clear understanding of your client base and the systems that your clients are navigating. So for me, I work with young people who presented themselves at the Mexico-United States border by themselves. They were arrested by a CBP agent and detained, where they were interviewed a bunch of times to if they were released from CBP detention, given a notice to appear in immigration court, and then transferred over to ORR, or the Office of Refugee Resettlement custody, where they go through a bunch of more interviews to identify a sponsor that can sponsor them in the United States and work with them as they're fighting their immigration case and their removal proceedings. So you're 15 years old, you left some violence in your home country, and now you're living in Queens with your aunt, and a lawyer calls you on the phone to talk about your case. So you kind of have a lot going on in your head and a lot to consider. So for me, the main thing I start with is being very clear of who I am, what I can do, and what I can't do for the young person. An attorney may mean a different thing around the world, and the court system may look differently around the world. And so being clear of my role, my working hours, and what they can expect from me is my first step in being trauma-informed by setting expectations. I'm not a mental health practitioner, and I'm not a public benefits expert. I can refer them if they ever have these types of things, but they shouldn't look to me as their therapist or as their social worker. Instead, I am their immigration attorney because of my licensing and my specific training. So just that's a huge part of my trauma-informed training, is setting expectations from the beginning and letting the young person know what they can expect from me and what they can't expect from me, and know that I'm a sounding board that they can bring a question to, where I can refer them to someone that can actually support them. The second thing that I really incorporate is empowering the young people through flexibility and choice throughout their case. So as I explained on their pathway to the border and then through detention to being released to their sponsor, there's no choice for them. They're being funneled around and placed in these really uncomfortable positions where they have to just kind of advocate for themselves at a very young age to try to get to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, just to feel a sense of, just to get to a place where they feel safe and secure. So I am always trying to give options whenever I can. Hey, so we need to discuss this document for your case. Do you want to come to my office? Do you want me to call you? Do you want me to FaceTime you? What works best for you? And empowering them through the flexibility and choice begins to like loosen them up in a way that they can then talk to me like a real person instead of just an authority figure who they're so used to just trying to spew out information and then get to the next step. And then finally, I think recognizing with them how messed up what they're doing is. When you're working with a 6-year-old that's being questioned by an ICE attorney in immigration court, it's really confusing. So just explaining to the young person that I completely recognize that this is a broken system and I don't think you should be part of it. The government has placed you in these proceedings and I'm here to support you as we try to move your case forward. And this is what it looks like. This is what the timeline looks like. And in the meantime, if you need any help with school or housing or anything like that, just let me know and I can make a proper referral. But just so you know, I'm your immigration attorney and this is what we can work on together. So I think being clear with expectations, empowering through choice, and finally recognizing that it's a broken system. And especially in the immigration system in this country, it is incredibly broken. And it's unfair of me to expect anyone to think differently.
Just to follow up on that, do any of you want to share any examples of successful trauma-informed interventions that you have used? Like the expectation setting, are there things that are sort of routine in your practice that you want to share with us today?
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I think you just said something incredibly important that I just want to highlight, and then I'll jump into my answer, which is, this piece of naming and acknowledging how broken the system is. I don't think we do that enough. And when I talk about truly advocating in solidarity with our clients, like, we have to name that, and we have to be able to help empower them to know, like, we know, because if we don't say that out loud, right, we are really contributing to this idea that, like, we actually think everything that's happening here is okay. So when I've done work like my family defense work representing parents, like, I can quote unquote win the case and get their child back, but that doesn't mean that harm didn't happen, right? Like, this parent and child were separated for some period of time. That is a trauma experience in and of itself, and the impact of that stays with them, right, forever. And so unless we're naming and saying, like, yes, we won the case, great, and also what just happened to you is the most awful thing that can happen to a parent and child, right? Like, and so whatever the context of the representation is, like, we have to start really participating and saying that, like naming it, talking to our clients about it, or they feel like we are part of the problem. I think in terms of what trauma-informed interventions work, right? Some of it is it's so individual, and this is the piece about our clients being our most important partners in that. Things that have worked have been the times when I or my students have been able to empower our clients to tell us what they really need. And that's looked really different in different situations. I remember with one client who we were representing in a multitude of sort of a, confluence of different family court matters, who every time I called this client, they would completely flip out. Like I'd call with something really small, like, like we received the notice, the date's going to be on February 19th, and I'm getting this torrent of emotion and everything is sort of, and I finally slowed down and just said to the client, like, it seems like you're not that happy when I call. Like, is there something we can do to make this better? And the client ended up, just opening the platform. The client themselves ended up saying to me, when you call and I see that number on my phone, it brings back a flood of all of the abuse and trauma that I have experienced. Abuse from my partner, watching my child be abused, like, by my partner, like all of these different things. And it's like, I can't control what happens after that, right? Because that's just my real emotional response. And they said, I really want to talk to you. I want the help. I appreciate your help. Could you let me know when we need to have a phone call? And so we worked out this system where every time, so the client themselves said, I commit to making myself available. If you could just send me an email and say, hey, I have an update. When is a good time for us to get on the phone, right? That's a very simple thing, but that is a trauma-informed practice because the client was the one who was empowered to say, here's what I need to make this attorney-client relationship workable. I have other examples, but I'll let other people talk.
I think one of the things that I have learned about my own trauma-informed practice are two things. It's important to ask your client what they need, but it's also important to ask what they want. Because sometimes we can't get them what they want, but it's important to know what they want. My clients often want justice for what happened to them. As much as I would love to do so, I can't, put George W. Bush in jail. And I can't, and Henry Kissinger's already dead. So, like, I can't do anything, right? But what I can do is I can get them a piece of paper from VA saying, we acknowledge that the military has harmed you. You're also going to get money for it, which is always helpful. But more importantly, they have a piece of paper from the federal government saying, this happened to you. We acknowledge it. And we're sorry in the form of a check every month. And it doesn't get them what they want because what they really want is justice. There is no justice in a lot of these broken systems. Justice is a very loaded word. It's not justice for my client who has severe PTSD and glioblastoma from serving near a burn pit to get $3,200 a month for the 6 months that they're going to be alive. That's not justice at all. Justice is often an unreachable solution in a lot of these broken systems. But what I can give them is the support and knowledge that somebody heard them. So I think that's one piece. The other piece is to not infantilize these people. These people are not fragile, they're not broken, they're not irreparable, they're people. And especially with the population that I serve, I think a lot of people, as they start to get into the work, they are afraid to ask the tough questions. These folks, I'm telling you, boot camp is harder than asking, did anybody hurt your feelings? Like, it's sometimes trauma-informed practice does not mean necessarily being gentle and supportive. It can mean just being real with the person sitting across from you. Like, this kind of sucks, You're sitting here, you're talking to me because you're obviously having a bad day because you need an attorney to get benefits that you deserve. And this kind of sucks. And it sucks that you went through this, but I can't change it. I'm not here to change it. I'm not here to, be the knight in shining armor. I'm here to help you navigate a really broken system, which is where the expectations come in. And, you know, I'm here if you need to vent a little, I can do that. But let's work together as a team to get through this system so that way you don't have to worry about choosing between putting food on the table and paying your light bill. So that's it.
So I just wanted to kind of echo what
Yeah.
everybody's been saying, and I think one really important one theme I'm seeing is really trying to be transparent, as transparent as possible with clients in terms of what you can do and what you cannot do, and the problems that you see, right, with the system that we are in, the client having to do whatever it is they have to do to get the relief that they are seeking, which in my cases, often with DV survivors, they have to testify in great detail about the abuse that they suffered, sometimes in their protection from abuse case, sometimes in their custody case. And then also having a conversation with them about what is it that you want, right? And going through this process, is that going to get you what you want? And sometimes it's yes, and sometimes it's no. With DV survivors, sometimes what they want is safety, right? And sometimes getting a PFA is something that I think that it will be possible for them if they go through this process. Sometimes not really. I may not think it's likely that that'll happen, and then they will have prepared and to testify about their abuse, and then they won't get what they're looking for. So having that conversation, I think, is really important, and just like everybody's been saying, acknowledging to the client that this is the system we have now, and it shouldn't be this way, but this is what we are working in.
Yeah, when I think of successful trauma-informed interventions, I think about suggestions I make during the expectations we discussed before a court hearing. So before a court hearing, we obviously go over everything to expect, who's going to be in the room, what the building looks like, what we're trying to accomplish. And part of that, of making the plan, is considering how can I make this plan a little bit easier and a little bit more personal to the young person I'm working with. So I often explain to the young person that I'm a very shy person and I get very nervous before I have to speak publicly. So I'm going to do some deep breathing before the court hearing. If you want to join in with me with that, we can work together on that. Or if you want to look at your phone or do whatever, that's totally okay too. But I'm going to be doing, for about 2 minutes before the court hearing, I'm going to be doing a breathing exercise. And then afterwards, I feel a little antsy after court hearings, and I'm going to want to walk it off. Would you be interested in a caminar y hablar, or like a walk and talk, where we just walk around the courtroom at the courthouse and explain what happened during the court hearing? And just suggesting these positive mental health practices that can help ground your client is an example of an intervention that is not an expectation, but rather a suggestion. So this is something that works for me. Do you want to try this out, or would you prefer just sitting and discussing what happened during the case? Either way works for me. What works best for you? And then also bringing yourself down and explaining that you're nervous too, and you are experiencing these emotions as well. It's not abnormal to feel this way.
I think I'm most struck by how we started with how complex of a topic trauma is and the multiple dimensions that it has, and like boiling it down, a lot of the advice that you've all offered like really just sounds like courtesy too. Like sending someone an email before you call them saying, hey, do you want to take a walk and talk around acknowledging that what's happening to you is messed up and is not okay, even if you can't do much more than that to help them. So thank you so much for breaking this topic down into ways that we can act on as attorneys. And with the time that we have left, I would love to open it up to the audience. If anybody has questions, please feel free to walk down to the mics at either end.
Not everybody all at once.
I had a question that's kind of picking up on that.
thread. When I was struck by what you were saying, it just seems like a lot of ways to be a good person. Listening to people, validating where they're coming from, yeah, sharing what works for you. And I guess I'm just wondering, what is different, or is it the same to just be a trauma aware lawyer versus like a trauma aware person? Or do you find that you use these strategies also in your life beyond, lawyering?
I love this question because actually that was what was coming to mind listening to each of the answers, right? Is I often say that the trauma aware lawyering is really just good lawyering, right? It's being a good human. I do think there are, we have specific professional responsibilities and duties as attorneys and, and legal standards and burdens to apply. And so I do think that there are some specific how we approach this in terms of incorporating into our lawyering. But right, it just starts with like centering humanity, being a good person, and really, I think some of the key things are just like slowing down, right, to make sure that we're not, and I know that can be hard. Like the realities of so much of legal practice is often it moves fast, right? Or, when I was doing family defense work day to day, I might meet my client for the first time 10 minutes before I represent them in a hearing where what's at stake is whether they go home with their child or not tonight, right? Like those are pretty big stakes. But still, like, it's not just the slowing down in terms of how we talk, but like slowing down our own brain state so that we are able both to invite the client to that lower brain state, right, as well as to keep ourselves sort of embodied in the moment of understanding our client.
Yeah, and
Oh, please.
I wanted to say, kind of along these lines, I find that a kind of a conversation that I have all too often with my law students who are 2Ls and 3Ls involves just really reminding them that they are a human person who will have human feelings while they are engaged in being a lawyer, and their client is also a human person who has had feelings about what has happened before and will continue to as they engage in this relationship and are take some part in this legal system. So to be aware of that and to think about engagement in that way, think about the attorney-client relationship in that way is the very first step. And I think it is every year or every semester surprising to me how many law students just don't have that basic perspective.
I really appreciate your note about slowing down. And I think that just a trauma-informed practice needs to be incredibly intentional. In my practice, I work with 85 young people, so it's constantly a mix of people and like, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. So I need to slow down and be intentional about the specific time I have with each client and how I can incorporate trauma-informed practice in that time. Because with young people, I have the opportunity to be an adult figure in their life who's listening to them, who's responding to them, and who's not adding harm to their life. So when I'm outlining before a client meeting, I'm writing down those legal concepts. I'm writing down strategies about case processing, but I'm also writing down specific things I know about the young person and how I can adjust my behavior so that they feel seen, heard, and responded to during that time, because that's what I can control.
I think the point about slowing down is a great one, but I think it's almost antithetical to, the typical law school experience where it's do more, brief your cases, read this, time management, make sure to return all the phone calls, make sure to check all your email. There's this go, 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 go. And I think it's also the type of person. There's like, we have no offense to anyone in the room. There's a lot of us type A people here. And it's go, 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 check the box, do the thing. And there aren't consistent messages, at least beyond the sort of clinical and experiential space, to slow down. To not just slow down to take a breath, but to really think about the things that we're learning and how this impacts actual human beings. So I really appreciate like the sort of consistent message for all the students in the room.
And that was not directed at you, Professor Moore.
Do we have time for me to ask a question?
Yes, please.
First of all, thank you so much. This was so fabulous. I don't engage in the active practice of law, but a few years ago I had a pro bono case at DCYF, and oh gosh, I wish I had heard all of your comments before I helped that client. But when Sarah talked about the humility of the lawyer and that we are part of the trauma, and Deeya sort of reaffirmed that. I want to share something that I give my students when I teach a course called Spiritual Dimensions of Lawyering. And I'd love your thoughts. So Jesus said, "Woe to you lawyers, because you weigh men down with burdens which are hard to bear, and you yourselves will not even touch the burdens with one of your fingers." And I have the students think about what are the burdens that lawyers place on people. And I would love your thoughts on that, to elaborate on what you had.
Can I take that one?
Go for it.
So for one, when I meet with my clients, I don't wear a suit. I hate suits. I don't wear them. Clear, obviously. I don't wear a suit. I really try to speak to them with as little legalese as possible, because I'm very, very, very aware of the fact that I am an attorney, and that is a power dynamic in a room that the person sitting across from me does not have. And the other thing that I want to say is one of the best things that my favorite professor in law school told me on day one of 1L, which is what got me through law school, is the law is the problem. The law is often the problem. And as attorneys, we are participating, whether we like it or not, in a system that is a problem. And I want to echo, I think all of us have said at some point that it's okay to acknowledge that to your clients. There's no eradicating the fact that we as attorneys are participating in a system that is white supremacist, that is capitalist, that is often inflicting an immeasurable amount of pain and suffering on people. But what we can do is, one, acknowledge and honor that, and two, have actual human conversations with our clients about, again, I'm not going to be able to get justice for the harm that you have with my clients that they have participated in, and also that you have experienced. But I can get you one step closer to maybe obtaining some level of closure on this harm that either you have perpetrated or has been perpetrated against you. I try to live my life by the golden rule of do unto others as, that, oh my God, I'm a recovering Catholic, obviously, but do unto others as they would do unto you. And sorry, Father O'Connell. And, when I'm sitting in a room, I ask my clients, have you ever met with an attorney before? And if they say yes, I ask how, and they usually are like, my public defender. And I'm like, okay, well, that kind of sucks. But this is going to be kind of a similar experience, but I'm going to try and demystify the process for you and hopefully make it less high stakesy than a criminal experience. It's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I do take it very seriously that my profession and all of your future professions, we are called upon when there is a problem, no matter what type of law you practice. Nobody goes to an attorney because they're having a great day. Even if you're buying a house, it's stressful. And we are charged with the very solemn duty of assisting that person with that problem. And it is not something that we should take lightly. But that being said, we also have to honor the fact that the law, which is what we are supposed to be upholding and carrying out, is often putting the person we're meeting with in the situation they're in the first place. So, that's why I have a therapist, which I fully support everybody getting one, that we have to struggle with that. And if you're not struggling with that, then you're not being a good attorney.
One of the things that I love about teaching law students is that they keep curiosity alive, right? And also, like, it's like they ask questions about things that we just accept as the norm, right? Once you've been practicing in a particular area, right, there are norms. Oh, well, that's how the judge always acts. That's how court functions. That's how, well, this is the kind of result you're usually going to get at this kind, particular kind of hearing. And law students don't accept those norms, but also for many of our clients, they don't know what those norms are, right? And so unless we're doing, again, that sort of calling it out, right, I really do think we are, going back to your question, burdening our clients, right, with sort of, it's a real risk of what's called normalization bias, right? Like we are making things that shouldn't be normal seem normal.
Right, and we are the person who is their advocate, who is hopefully listening to them and believing them and giving them some space to tell their story, and then we're also taking them through the system, and if we're not calling it out, then we're just giving it more, we're normalizing it.
Yes, I know it is 10:33, but I'm hopeful that yes, Eliza, please, Professor Vornberg, if you have a question. Yes.
Close us out, Les.
First of all, I want to welcome Will back to campus. I'm very excited to see you. My question relates to the practice of law that is in the triage setting. So, we have an eviction help desk that some of my colleagues from Rhode Island Legal Services are here, where you're not meeting with the client ahead of time, you're not walking them through the process, you don't have that luxury. You're meeting them in the hallway. They may be, most of these clients, I would say, just by virtue of living in poverty, have been traumatized by that experience, and faced with one of the worst days, because whatever it is, whether it's a family law case or eviction, they have hostile opposing counsel who may or may not be re-traumatizing them. And so you're there doing the best you can to assist these individuals. Do you have any recommendations when you don't have those opportunities to slow down, you don't have the opportunities to prepare them?
The slowing down isn't just like slowing down how we practice. It's slowing down, like, even just the pace of how we're talking, the tone of voice we're using, right? The invitation to get, right? You're dealing with someone who's dealing with maybe the worst day of their life, right? They might be ordered evicted. They might lose custody of their child, whatever is, they might be removed in an immigration proceeding. But it's slowing down our own brain state so that we're inviting the other, which again is hard to do and requires practice. Like this piece, I love Will's thing about, like the breathing before court, right? But even just remembering ourselves to take a deep breath, to take in the information, to, to make the best use of that very limited time, right? We aren't always, even when we have longer term representation, not always going to have the benefit of time, but we can slow down in the moment as best we can so that we increase the capacity for true communication with a client.
Yeah, yesterday I had such a great experience taking my clinic students to the immigration court at 26 Federal Plaza. And we were just there to observe court so they could see how a typical master calendar hearing works at immigration court. And we went through security, we were going up to the main filing desk, and I was looking at the bulletin board of all the different hearings that were going on and which courtrooms were assigned to which judge, just so I could understand where to direct the students. And I'm like stressed, I'm like looking at everything, and then I turn around and I see that several of the students are helping these pro se respondents on a form that they were working on while they were sitting there. Immigration court in New York is set up so incredibly poorly, and there's such a inaccess to language, and so bringing in a bunch of students that are really bright-eyed and have different language skills, the people immediately gravitated towards them because of their openness, and they're like, oh, I know you can listen to me. Can you help me with this form? And so I, of course, reminded them to tell them that they're not their attorney. They don't represent them, but for this limited purpose, they can help them on a simple change of address form, which is in English, that the people have no access to. So I think just putting yourself in a space, even if you don't have the time to prepare, of just being open and listening to someone and explaining and orienting them. Okay, you're here, you're in this system. Here are potential resources that may help you down the line. So there's a list of pro bono legal service providers. Over here, it's in English, but you can refer to this and call these numbers, and just circling them and pointing them in the right direction. So many of the systems we work in are inherently set up to punish certain types of people. And I think we have to remember that and enter these spaces just, hey, what's going on?
Just one thing I would like to add is really thinking about empathy and how you can express empathy in even that very short interaction. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. This must be really difficult. Just having those kinds of interactions along with providing information can be helpful for somebody and kind of create that space for them.
Yeah, and I'll round it out with my job. We're co-located within VHA, the Veterans Healthcare Administration. So, like clinicians are my neighbors, and vets just kind of walk in and out. We were founded in a broom closet, CVLC. And now we're in the basement, but the broom closet is still there. And so vets in our community are very used to just like wandering in and being like, hey. And I think one of the, empathy, what they need, what they want. But I think some of my favorite interactions are when the vets come in and they are just furious about something and just taking the moment to be like, why are you pissed? Like, what's going on? And there was this one guy who his hearing aids weren't working, and he was frustrated because people would tell him like audiology is on the second floor, but he couldn't hear them because his hearing aids weren't working. And so he was wandering around in a circle. And so finally I just had to yell at the guy so he could hear me, like, you got to go to the second floor. And it's just moments like that where, somebody who comes to you so angry and furious, and your instinct might be like, whoa, back off. The guy just can't hear. And he just needs, this 80-something-year-old guy just needs help getting to the elevator and going to audiology so they can push a button. So, just being a good human being and not making first assumptions of people because they're in a bad spot. And hopefully it's as easy to fix as pushing a button.
Right. Well, thank you all so much for your time and your